Hey friends, it's your brother Hampton. I want to do a video discussion on confidence. I get a lot of questions from audience members, especially younger ones, on how to feel more confident. They're trying to grow into their own in the world and they may not quite feel secure in their placement in the world. And I want to talk about two main pieces of advice they probably get. You may have heard it if you clicked on this video. And while these do make sense in certain contexts, I want to help give some context for people who don't feel like they completely apply to them. The first one that I sometimes hear when someone doesn't feel confident is the fake it till you make it line, right? So if you don't feel confident, you can fake the confidence. And I think this does make sense in certain contexts, but I think in others, I understand why it makes them feel more insecure. Because think about if you were on the receiving end of that. If you're ever confused about whether or not a piece of advice works, a line would work, an angle would work, think about how you would feel if someone were directing it at you. So let's say you were going into surgery and your doctor. Would you want your doctor to act and fake confidence even when they feel very insecure? Or would you rather they be authentic and say, I'm not confident in this procedure, I should refer you to a colleague because I haven't done this before, or I need help from someone else? I'd probably rather they be authentic with that. So in that sense, yes, you don't want to fake your competence by masquerading as having confidence. But the second part of that adds into the second piece of advice we hear is that is kind of the other end where they say, well, you don't feel confident because you're probably not good enough. That certainly has applied to me before. I'll put it this way. I don't know if it applies to you. I'm hesitant to give negative thoughts like that, even when true, because I try to phrase them in a way that's sensitive to other people. But I know it's applied to me before, so it does apply in some cases. But I can't help but think of some cases where people are good enough, but I think they don't feel confident because they don't understand the context under their competence. So they might be very good, but they're not quite sure how they stack up against other people. It truly does come back to enough experience, but not necessarily experience in growing your capability, your skill, but you improve your confidence because you see how others may react to you, you see contingencies, you see things that may go wrong, you see controversies, and you see counter arguments. So this is something that I want you to consider if you're in some kind of knowledge-based field, which almost every field has some base of knowledge. A singer, a guitarist, a doctor, a gardener, right? So there's actionable practical skills, but there's also knowledge supporting that. So we know what skills to practice and what skills to work on and how we can really hone our power and grow it in the most efficient way possible. And if you're in a knowledge-based field and you're looking for confidence around your knowledge, around your skills, then I recommend having confidence in your knowledge itself and not necessarily the credentials surrounding that. So if you went to Harvard and you got a degree, or you went to college and you got a degree, but you don't feel quite confident in that, then I would have confidence in the knowledge itself, because that's something that I feel like we don't discuss often enough in this world. But because of the nature of the internet and how information flows, yes, there's a lot of false information out there, but there's usually some way to verify our foundational facts. And let's say you went to school for engineering. Let's say you went to MIT. You went to school for engineering. You have credentials around your engineering, but and that credential might get you a job interview. It might even get you the actual job. But in order to really drive yourself forward, you would need what those credentials imply or promise, and that is the actual skills of engineering. I'm not saying credentials aren't important. They obviously are, especially in certain fields, and they can represent or they can hint towards someone's true skill. However, it's important to have confidence, in my opinion, in the actual skills to back up and earn those credentials. That's the foundation that underlies the credentials. So if you're not feeling confident despite having accolades, awards, and credentials, then have confidence in the actual skills and knowledge. And part of having confidence in your skills and knowledge is not just having successes and seeing that you're much better than everybody else. You're so good at this thing, you're in the top 1%, not better than everyone else, but better than most people in the world, better than most world champions. You might be at one point the world champion. But I think if you handle them correctly, your failures can also give you confidence because that helps you know where your actual ability is. If you are so strong that you have never been able to not lift something, you can lift everything that you've ever tried to lift, that's great, and some people might feel very confident, but I believe there's a subset of people that might never know if they're going to suddenly run into something they can't lift because they don't know where their limits are. So I would feel more confident knowing that yes, I'm tremendously strong in this hypothetical situation, and I would know what I can or should avoid around those limits. And something you may want to consider is having confidence not only that the knowledge you've learned and acquired and practiced is right and from credible sources, like Newton's 3 laws of gravity, got them under lock and key. Done. I am so confident that I know these, I can recite them, I know why they're there, I've tested them, I know they are true. Not only that, but it's helpful to know counter-arguments and common confusions and common controversies around those things. So you might believe something, and you might even know, in your opinion, you might even know that this is true despite the controversy around it, but it's helpful for your confidence to understand the controversy behind it. This is how someone might prepare for a debate, for example. If they know what they say, but they also know arguments people might use against that, it's helpful to know those arguments so you aren't blindsided, and that will also help you feel confident. So not only confidence when everything is going right, but I believe a mark of mastery would be having confidence even for things that may potentially go wrong. Now, I don't have enough confidence in my knowledge of physics to have a legitimate counter-argument against the 3 laws of gravity. Maybe someone else does. If there's controversy, please let me know in the comments. But we'll talk about calisthenics, for example. If someone says, well, you can't get much stronger or more muscular with calisthenics, and something like push-ups, for example, you're eventually going to need extra weight, which is partially true, but some people might bring up that if you go over, say, 10 or 15 reps, then you can't build muscle or strength. That used to be something that I hear quite often. I still remember on a famous exercise tutorial, it said, if you're doing more than 10 reps, you're just doing cardio. But nowadays we know that you can gain muscle at what they say is any rep range, but I would say almost any rep range. So that's a counter argument to that. But another counter argument to that is like, yes, while you could gain muscle and make progress, I should say, in pretty much any rep range, when you start to get so good at push-ups or sit-ups or something that you go into the hundreds, then you may face some diminishing returns, and you probably won't get as strong as if you use external weight, unless you're doing it in a very particular way. You can use harder variations, and then the argument kind of goes on from there. I don't even want to say argument, it's a discussion, it's the discourse, it's the understanding of back and forth respectfully so we can find a greater truth, we can find the truth. Because through this discussion where we explore potential weaknesses and different sides, we can understand the weak parts, the strong parts, and have a more nuanced view on the topic. And he doesn't know that I'm bringing him up here, but I have a friend that I talked to for a little while, and I haven't talked to him in a while, but I still consider him a friend, who runs a movement channel named Eternal Movement. And I've seen him teach calisthenics, yoga, and I don't know if he calls himself a hand balancer. I don't want to talk for him, but he has, in my opinion, very beautiful looking handstands. And he teaches handstands in a way that I'm sure others have, but I haven't really experienced before, where he shows a handstand, but he talks about having confidence in your balance, not just from shoulder stability, training, mobility, but he talks about knowing how to rebalance yourself. So if you're holding a perfectly straight handstand that you see some gymnasts do, and oops, you're tilting a little bit over here, your legs are going forward, your legs are going back, he talks about practicing going back and recentering gradually. So not only can you have greater mobility during your handstand, but you also have planned for the failure, in quote, and contingencies, and you have more confidence as a hand balancer because now you know that if you get forced into this movement, or you feel a little off balance that day, or the wind blows you, and you're over here, you have a way that you can get back to center. And I think that applies to confidence in many things. Not only confidence when everything's going right, but confidence to recover when things may go wrong, and confidence to adapt when new things may come to mind. And I have 2 more quick points to add context to this first one, but they're close enough together that I'll actually bring up the second one first, the last point, the third point first. And that is, what is confident? What is appearing confident? What does that mean? Right? So I'll go to the second point now, the one before that. And I think a lot of confidence actually comes from understanding, like I mentioned before, the dynamic and the context of things. You understand where the pressures are. You understand the social dynamics. You understand where, it sounds kind of cringy, but where the power lies. When you know that, then you feel more confident in what you can and you can't do. For example, if you've been around babies, or you've raised a baby, or you've had family members or friends who've had babies, I guess everyone's had a family member who's had a baby because your parents, right? But anyway, if you've been around babies, you know that they're confident in some things, but they're also gradually exploring. They're expanding their comfort zone. There are some things where they are, rightfully so, quite insecure about because they don't know the dynamics of the world. They're still learning so much of what's being thrown at them. They just learned about the color red like last week. Of course they're not confident. They might not even know all the colors. There might be a color they've never seen before, and they should be open-minded to that. And while most of you watching this aren't babies, there are some of us who seem like babies to older people. And older is certainly relative, because if you're 5, you might seem young to a 25-year-old. But if you're 25 years old, you might seem young to someone who's 60 or 70, because they were in their 30s and 40s when you were born. My point there is that sometimes they may kind of laugh at us not seeming confident in something, because in their minds they're like, well, it's like a 5-year-old saying they're not confident in something. It's like, yeah, of course you're not confident. You just developed object permanence like 2 weeks ago. You're welcome for remembering me, by the way. Just calm down, you'll have time. And while that might seem condescending to us, like this is kind of a tangent, but I try to understand in the context of how they see the world, and a little bit of truth that with time and experience generally comes confidence. And that doesn't necessarily mean if you're good or bad at something. Like, you might be very skilled at something relative to other people. You might be okay at your job, or you might be lower than average at your job. But either way, having that social awareness, having that self-awareness, and not having, I guess, the Dunning-Kruger effect there of knowing where you stand, knowing the things that you can and should speak on. I think that can really help your confidence overall, especially in an age where they encouraged us to have opinions on things, maybe even before we were ready to have a good, accurate opinion. And I know I already mentioned that before, but I wanted to emphasize this before I brought up the second point, because it's important to know that there's not necessarily shame in acknowledging that we're not quite as good at some things as other people, because we all do have strengths and weaknesses. Some tremendously talented people who seem like they're good at many things, they're going to have things they're not as good at as well. This is how we're designed, and that's okay. That's part of how we work together. In economics, they talk about specialization. So let's say there's only 2 things you can do in the world. You can collect coconuts or you can fish. And let's say there's this powerhouse who's better at collecting coconuts and fishing than you are. They can just way better at coconuts, way better at fishing. But relative to himself, he's better at coconuts. He's better at coconuts. He can still fish better than you can, but relative to himself, he's better at coconuts. And if you are better at fishing relative to yourself, then you can fish and they can collect coconuts. And if we specialize in these things that we're good at, while still trying to be well-rounded when possible, yes, and the idea is that everyone can benefit from that. Now, from understanding that these dynamics don't necessarily have shame attached to them, we can understand that yes, we may feel different social pressures and confidence and dynamics when we're talking to our girlfriend or boyfriend, for example, when we're talking to our spouse, for example, and when we talk to our boss, when we talk to our gardener, when we talk to the waitress that we're ordering food from, when we talk to our customer. These people all have slightly different dynamics with us in terms of what they can do to us, what we can do with them, what they're socially allowed to say to us, and what pressures we have in place that give us freedom to move as we want. So you may have more freedom in making a decision with your spouse and about your household where you think, well, I want to do this more. And they say, well, I want to do this instead. You may have the freedom to choose what you want. Whereas if you're talking with your boss, unless you have a very special job, you probably aren't able to go in and say, hey, I want this job instead, I'm gonna go do that, and just pick from any job within the company. You usually can't quite do that. Now, that's not necessarily bad one way or the other. It's okay to have structure in our society. But having an understanding of that from time and experience gives us more confidence in what we're able to say, what we're able to do, because we know, even implicitly, even if it's unlikely to happen, the possibilities of what can happen. So with our spouse, we have an emotional relationship, among other things, romantic relationship. And with our workplace, we have a financial and responsibility and duty-oriented relationship, depending on what it is. And things we do in these different dynamics can change within that. And that's when I'll bring up the third point, which is, well, what is being confident in something? What is appearing confident in something? Because it might mean different things to different people. Because once you understand these dynamics, in my opinion, then you don't necessarily need to act a certain way because you understand where the power points, where the pressure points lie. A common thing that I've sometimes heard in business is, well, Hampton, you might be too nice to this person, or you don't have to apologize for that. It's not your fault. And I understand this, and I think part of it is cultural. I did grow up in the US, but I think part of it is cultural and part of it is kind of the subcultural, I guess. Because even though the US is one country, there's many different types of people within it. And I think we've grown up in different ways. Because I have a feeling that I don't need to posture with someone that I have power if I actually have the power. Once again, not necessarily good or bad, but in particular situations, we may have the power. If I am hiring a contractor to help work on our website, to work on a project that we have, I generally have the ability to choose whether or not to work with them. And yes, usually it's me asking them to do things and telling them what I would like in exchange for money. And if they don't want to do it, then I can usually just stop working with them. Now, granted, they can also stop working with me, that's true. But knowing how things usually are, and I've also worked for other people too, there's generally a feeling that we try to accommodate the person that's employing us within reason, as long as they're not taking advantage of us. But we try to accommodate them because we're offering a service. I used to do design work, and if a client wanted something, I would try to accommodate that and be paid fairly for that. Pretty important. But because of that nature, I don't necessarily need to feel like I am telling someone what to do. It's okay, especially if we say it politely, but I just prefer to ask things of people. I'm not trying to be fake, I'm not trying to seem overly sincere, but when I want a project done, I say, hey, can you do this? If you don't mind, if you have the time, could you do this and have it done by Wednesday? I could say, get this done by Wednesday, and if they say they can't, then I'm like, well, I'll find someone else. And I could. And if I wanted to be more polite, I could say, I need this done by Wednesday, can you do it? They might say no, then I would move on. But those, in my opinion, all kind of go to the same direction. If I ask someone, can you do this? They can tell me if they can't do it, and then I can try to accommodate. And then if I really need to, I might hire someone else for that project. But part of my understanding of confidence, and this is, once again, my personal preference, if I feel like I already know what we can and should do, if we know the rules of the game we're playing, so to speak, then I also don't need to posture. Because posturing is actually what leads to false confidence, in my opinion, to insecurities and fears. Because if I think, hey, I'm gonna pretend to be this way, the reason I'm pretending is probably because there's something to hide, right? And then there's always that fear that someone might find the thing that I'm hiding. It can get pretty deep, I guess, in terms of the possibilities of what's inside, because they're all different for us. That's what I mean by deep. But there's also leadership skills, speaking skills, communication skills, or that may not necessarily apply. So if you're an officer in the military, for example, you might speak to people in a certain way. There's a certain dynamic there. But once again, that's a different culture there. And my takeaway from that is if you don't feel like you have to be a certain way, if you feel like you don't have to act a certain way, and you just want to understand what we're here to do. So if you're working with someone, they want to work, they want you to pay them, and you want a good project. If you're sharing something with a friend, what do you want? Do you want feedback? Do you want criticism? Do you want compliments? Maybe be clear with that. Maybe be authentic with that. And then when everyone understands what they're supposed to do, and you understand how things are, you understand the context, then you can feel more authentic and you can feel more confidence. In my opinion, the authenticity and the experience over time builds confidence, not necessarily the other way around. You don't necessarily have to act confident. You might have to in some situations, but when possible, build that solid foundation of confidence by having knowledge, skills, and understanding. And then you can also be polite and friendly about it, because that's always nice. Have a beautiful day.